For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome to StratNewsGlobal. Last week, I shared with you the Indian Air Force's plans or desire to enhance the fighter jet strength in its kitting. How it's going to do, what are the permutations and combinations was the subject of last week. But this week, I want to talk to you about why the Indian Air Force needs much more than just fighter jets. Force enablers for the Indian Air Force is the subject of this week's Simply Nitin. I'm Nitin Gokhale. So as I mentioned, the Indian Air Force needs not just fighter jets, but also needs support system to sustain operations of these jets in adversity and during hot wars. Therefore, I'm saying force enablers for the Indian Air Force, they're as vital as combat platforms. And why they're vital is something that we will see over the next 20 minutes or so. So if you look at the need for support systems, you will realize that every force, and especially air forces around the world, require great engineering teams on the ground, engineers, the men who keep the fighter jets going by maintaining them. The systems have to be absolutely foolproof. They have to be quick for turnarounds between sorties. But the platforms also require systems which can enhance their reach, their range, and of course the effectiveness in trying to acquire targets, in trying to understand what the adversary is up to. And to do all that, the Air Force requires several platforms which are not limited to the fighter jets. And given that the number of fighter jets is going to be constrained, is going to be limited because of the long acquisition cycle and the complex nature of India's procurements, as well as the fact that selecting a combat jet for the next 40 years service in the Indian Air Force is not going to be easy. Therefore, to give more teeth to the existing fleet and some incoming fighter jets that come into or get inducted into the Indian Air Force, they require force enablers. There are these two reasons primarily. So I'm going to concentrate on giving a rundown about what combat enablers that the Indian Air Force is looking for very actively, and which will enable more teeth and more strength to the Indian Air Force. They include ISTAR, the intelligence, surveillance, targeting and reconnaissance platforms. They also include the airborne early warning and combat systems, which is based on an aircraft, and flight refueling aircraft, that is mid-air refueling or air-to-air refueling that air forces around the world are now depending more and more on. Now, to get all this, the Air Force requires to plan. It requires to also convince the planners and the decision makers and why these platforms are required. Because some might say and turn around and say that the existing ISR platforms, that is the intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance platforms like the RPAs, remotely piloted aerial vehicles, the satellite-based sensors, all this are enough. But the fact is India's border situation, especially along the Himalaya against China, the Tibet border, India requires real-time monitoring. And that real-time monitoring will have constraints if it is only dependent on the space-based assets, satellites, or the RPAs, as I mentioned, remotely piloted aerial vehicles, which are deployed on the Himalayan border, but they're not enough. They fulfill one part of the function, certainly, but the full picture is not available to the Indian Air Force or to the military at the border if other combat enablers are not brought in. These platforms have limitations of range. They have vulnerability against the adversary's countermeasures, like the RPAs or the what they call UAVs can easily be shot down if detected by the adversaries. The satellites have limitations of cloudy weather. Sometimes the satellites passing over a certain area of concern may have long gaps, and therefore the Indian Air Force is saying that you require more combat enablers which are beyond these two, or satellite-based sensors or satellite-based imagery that is available. Because the RPAs or the UAVs, their time on target is also limited, because their range is limited, their time of flying is also limited. So therefore, the Indian Air Force is now looking for as I said, the ISTAR. What it really means, we must understand what ISTAR really means. It means that these platforms, unlike the remotely piloted aerial vehicles or satellite sensors, would not be limited by line of sight constraints. Any UAV has to go over the target, get the imaging done, get the recording done, and then come back. But these ISTARs are actually standoff platforms. They can do it from a long range, they have a wider range, and they need not necessarily go into the adversary's area or adversary's borders. Therefore, the ISTARs are required. They provide long-range ISR capabilities, as I mentioned. The IFS therefore decided to look for indigenous ISTAR, or what they now call it I2 STAR. That is indigenously designed and developed the ISTAR. That is looking for indigenous ISTAR, which is intelligence, surveillance, tracking and targeting and reconnaissance platforms. So what do they bring to the table? As I mentioned, they reduce the time between detecting a target or what is called sensor and the shooter, which is sitting somewhere else. The quick messaging between the sensor and the shooter is provided by dynamic targeting solutions provided by the I2 STAR as I call it. So I2 STAR is expected to have a high capacity multi-sensor image intelligence, which means that high resolution pictures, high resolution imagery, which can give real-time picture of what the adversary is up to in terms of movement, in terms of deployment, in terms of strength of forces on the ground or elsewhere. And therefore, I2 STAR is something that is extremely important for the Indian Air Force, and they have actively started looking for an indigenous solution, which is heartening given the fact that India is now fully going in for the Atmanirbhar Bharat route as far as possible. Then there are, of course, the AEW&Cs, which is the Airborne Early Warning and Combat Systems. So given that constraint that the ground-based radars have, the Indian Air Force has been looking for particularly new the AEWCs, airborne sensors, which are required for early detection. They are required to give not only early detection but also pass on the message to the combat fleet. That will boost the strength of the Indian Air Force. So therefore, what is it going to do? The Air Force is constrained by the fact that today it only has 3 AEWCs, which is not enough for Air Force as large as in the Indian Air Force and a border as long as India has with 2 of its adversaries, Pakistan and China. China now the primary adversary with nearly 4,057 kilometers long boundary with China. To keep that under surveillance 24/7 or at least a major part of the day requires these eyes in the sky. And these eyes in the sky are extremely important, which was proved during the Balakot attack, which I will talk about. These are increasing requirements that are coming through to keep a watch, as I mentioned, on the long borders. And as we have seen, these systems of systems can change the course of combat, as it happened in Balakot. If all of you remember one of the videos that I had done some years ago, when the Mirage 2000s took off from Gwalior and they were supposed to go inside Pakistan via the Pakistan occupied Kashmir, crossing the line of control. They didn't cross the line of control straight away. They actually turned west and over Himachal Pradesh. After taking off from Gwalior, they refueled themselves air to air and then went there. And the radar detection and the electronic signature, which electronic countermeasures that they take, electronic surveillance measures that they take, can be done by these AWECs and the AWACS. AWACS, of course, you know what they are. They are the airborne warning and control systems. And the AWECs are airborne early warning and combat systems. Now, these both are required. India today has only 3 of those AWECs and 3 AWACS, which are not enough. Now, if you look at how the flight refuelers enable the Indian Air Force to extend its reach, mid-air flight refuelers, they sort of extend the reach. If the flights have taken off from, say, South India somewhere, and if they have to come to attack or come to operate along the Himalaya border, they can actually refuel in the air itself instead of touching down or landing somewhere and then taking off again, which was a waste of time. And India is increasingly looking for power projection for out-of-area contingencies, and therefore, if they have to go out of India's boundaries and do power projection, the air-to-air refuelers are extremely important. That's what the Indian Air Force is looking for. The Balakot airstrike, as I mentioned a little while earlier, actually did the trick or showed the importance of the air refuelers. As I mentioned, when they went west, they got refueled there so that they shouldn't fall short of fuel when they were inside Pakistan. Therefore, the Mirage 2000s actually refueled themselves and then carried on for the attack into Balakot. So the importance is already demonstrated, not very far off, just about 4 years ago in February 2019. So therefore, only half a dozen IL-78 based refuelers are not enough. If India has to utilize its combat jet fleet, which is right now currently low on numbers, it also needs to procure the AARs, the air-to-air refuelers. And for the last 16-17 years, the Indian Air Force has tried to procure the AARs or the flight refueling aircraft twice. Once in 2006 and second time in 2010. For some reason or the other, this could never fructify. This could never come through. And therefore, the Air Force is again short of the flight refuelers. But in 2018, the Air Force has issued an RFI, the request for information, from intending manufacturers for procuring or buying flight refuelers, mid-air flight refuelers. But still, it was 5 years ago, and that is not already too late if you really see that if they are not procured quickly enough, the Indian Air Force will again be short of what is now becoming a vital part of its combat fleet, the flight refueling aircraft. And therefore, I thought to complete the loop that just the combat jets are not enough, or the combat jets are not alone which can fight the battle or take on the adversary, either Pakistan or China. India needs, and the Indian Air Force needs these combat enablers or force enablers as they call them. I think that's something that the government must give more attention to. It has been doing a wonderful job in procuring equipments and platforms from indigenous sources and also quickly taking decisions on what are the vital needs of the three forces. But some of these force enablers fall by the wayside, or they get ignored by decision makers. Hopefully, the Air Force will be able to convince the national security planners and get the approvals for at least these three force enablers in coming years. And that's something that they must concentrate on, is what I think. But if you have any other thoughts, if you have any other comments, feedback, you know where to reach me. At the moment, I'm going to stop here. I will try and give you a certain visibility on what the other two forces are looking for and what are the critical shortages that Indian Navy and the Indian Army are facing. We will talk about in some subsequent episodes. But for the time being, I'm going to stop. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't. If you have already, please spread the word to your friends, family and acquaintances. Do give feedback. Feedback is important. The last episode, lots of comments came. Keep those comments coming and we will take some of those on board to do such episodes in the future. For the time being, it's goodbye.